Hello everyone, and welcome to A Teacher Explains.
I'm a teacher, and in this video, I'm going to explain the 4 major historical trends in media effects research. We're going to trace the whole story of how we've thought about media's influence, all the way from the early days of radio right up to our super-connected digital world. So here's our game plan. First, we'll set the stage with the big question that started it all. Then we're going to travel through time looking at 4 different ways of thinking. We'll start with the idea of an all-powerful media. Then see how science pushed back with the limited effects model. From there, things split into 2 really interesting modern views, the critical cultural perspective and the idea of meaning-making audiences. And finally, we'll wrap it all up to see how these ideas fit together. At the very heart of this whole field is one single powerful question. How does media affect society? That's it. This one question has fueled more than a century of research. And as you're about to see, the answers have changed. A lot, as both our media and our world have transformed. Okay, so let's rewind the clock. Our story kicks off in the late 1800s and early 1900s. This was a time of massive, massive social change. And it's right here that we get our first big idea about media, the belief in an all-powerful media, a concept we often call mass society theory. The thinking back then was that mass media worked kind of like a hypodermic needle. The idea was that it could just inject messages, ideas, and opinions directly into the brains of the public. And the audience, well, they were seen as totally passive, almost defenseless, and easily manipulated by whoever was sending the message. So what was driving this fear? Well, you have to remember this was the industrial age. The elites, the intellectuals, they were really worried. They saw these new things, cheap newspapers, movies, the radio, and they thought, wow, these could be used to control what everyone thinks. They were afraid that popular culture would just wash away traditional values, and that these powerful new tools could even topple the government. It was all tied up in a general anxiety about how fast cities were growing and society was changing. But here's an interesting twist. This theory actually had 2 sides. You had the pessimists who saw media as this dangerous tool for propaganda and, the end of civilization as they knew it. But there was also an optimistic view. Some people thought media could be an amazing force for good, a way to educate everyone, share new ideas, and build a better world. But the key thing to remember is, whether they were optimistic or pessimistic, they both agreed on one thing, that media's effects were direct, immediate, and incredibly powerful. Okay, so let's jump forward to the 1940s. The old assumptions of mass society theory started to get questioned. A new era of actual scientific research began, and this new approach led researchers to a totally different conclusion. Welcome to the era of limited media effects. So this is when communication research really got serious. Scholars like Paul Lazarsfeld started using rigorous scientific tools, things like huge surveys and controlled experiments, to actually test media's influence. They weren't just guessing anymore, they were collecting hard data. And what they found pretty much dismantled that whole idea of an all-powerful media. One of the most important discoveries from this time was the 2-step flow theory. And this was a game changer. It showed that media messages don't just hit us directly. No, first they go to people called opinion leaders. Think about those influential people in your life. Friends, family, colleagues you respect. They get the information, they interpret it, and then they pass it on to the rest of us. So our own social networks act like a filter. So what was the big takeaway from the limited effects era? It was this. Media is much, much more likely to reinforce what you already believe than it is to change your mind. Suddenly, the audience wasn't seen as a bunch of passive victims anymore. We were seen as active selectors of information, protected by our own beliefs and our relationships with other people. But that idea of minimal effects didn't quite sit right with everyone. By the 1970s, a lot of researchers felt that something was missing, that media's influence had to be more subtle and complex than that. This led to a huge split in the field, a fork in the road, really. One path went macro, looking at the big, ideological power of media. The other path went micro, zooming in on how individual people actually use media. Let's go down that first path, the critical cultural view. This perspective really took off in the 70s, and it brought the idea of power right back to the forefront of the conversation about media. Scholars in this camp basically said, you're looking for the wrong thing. They argued that media's real power isn't about changing your vote in one election. It's much bigger. It's about shaping our entire view of the world over a long, long time. In this view, media doesn't just show us reality, it actually helps build a dominant worldview that usually benefits the people already in power. And The key concept here is a word that sounds a little academic, hegemony. But the idea is pretty simple. It's the process where the ideas of the most powerful groups in society become so normal, so widespread, that we all just accept them as common sense. And media is absolutely crucial for this, because it constantly shows us this worldview as being natural and just the way things are. It's a form of control that works through our consent, not through force. Okay, so at the very same time the critical cultural view was developing, that second path was also being explored. While some scholars were looking at big power structures, this other group turned the focus right back onto the audience, but they saw the audience in a whole new light. This is our fourth trend, the active, meaning-making audience. This entire way of thinking can be summed up by just flipping the old question around. Instead of asking, what does media do to people, these researchers started asking, what do people do with media? That simple change just reframes everything, right? It puts the audience member, you and me, in the driver's seat. This perspective sees us as active, goal-oriented participants. We don't just sit there and absorb whatever's on the screen. We actively go out and find specific media to meet our needs, whether that's a need for information, a need to relax, or a need to figure out who we are. The effects of media from this point of view are really shaped by what we, the users, bring to the table. And we do this in so many ways, right? We use media to get the news, sure, but we also use it to cheer ourselves up after a bad day. We use it to help build our identity, like being a fan of a certain kind of music or a TV show. We join online fan works to connect with people. And really importantly, we can even use media to argue back against the main messages we're seeing. The audience here isn't just a consumer, it's creative and powerful. Wow, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've gone from believing media was all-powerful to thinking it was pretty weak, and then landing on these two modern ideas, where media power is both subtle and something we actively negotiate. Let's put it all together. This chart really lays it all out. You can see the progression clearly. First, mass society theory, with its all-powerful media and passive audience. Then, the scientific turn to limited effects, where media power was indirect and the audience was selective. And finally, we have our two modern perspectives that exist side by side, the critical cultural view with its focus on pervasive ideological power, and the meaning-making view, which sees power as negotiated by an active, interpretive audience. And all of this brings us to a huge final question for you to think about. When you look at our world today, a world of social media, filter bubbles, and algorithms that know what you want before you do, which of these ideas, or maybe what combination of them, do you think best explains how media is affecting us right now? The theories and concepts we've talked about in this explainer were drawn from these foundational texts in mass communication theory.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel.